Morning, everybody. So a friend of ours was on Facebook, our Facebook group that we have here locally, and he had some problems with charging his car. So I thought I would real quickly try and run through in this short drive some of the basics of charging, because there's going to be a lot of people coming up now with Model 3s that don't really have any knowledge of what they need to do to prepare their house for charging. And I'm sure that there are people who are new owners regardless who may run into some kind of charging problem and need to troubleshoot it. And having gone through a variety of charging problems myself, I'll give you a couple of the pointers regarding that. So first of all, if you're getting an electric car, I strongly believe you need to have reliable charging either at your home or at your work. And the reason for that is because I don't believe in compromising for the car. I make no provision for it being an electric car. If you're going to have parity with gas cars, you need to have parity with gas cars, and that's really the end of that. There's no allowance to be made for them. So I know some will disagree, and Tesla's putting in some of these urban superchargers because people live in apartments, don't necessarily have reliable charging, et cetera, et cetera. I got to tell you, if you're driving daily and you're commuting in your car, you really want to have charging at home or at work, or you will be spending some portion of your time constantly wondering when you're going to get the car charged. And there's two main reasons why that's an issue with electric cars that you don't have with gas. Just very briefly, one is that, well, electric cars use energy even when they're parked, and gas cars don't. They do have that advantage. The other is that it's a lot harder to fill up an electric car because you don't have electric charging stations on every corner that you can completely refill the battery in 5 minutes. It's just a fact. So the superchargers are awesome, and they can be fast, but they can also be very, very slow. And if you're relying on a supercharger in winter to charge up your car that's been sitting at your apartment building for a long weekend, and you need to commute on Monday, and you're going to roll that cold battery into a supercharger, you're going to be really, really disappointed with how slow it is, because it will not charge quickly for a long time until that battery warms up. So that's my little soapbox there. I don't want to discourage the electric car movement, but I'm just being real with you. Having said that, I think a lot of people who are being the first wave of folks buying these cars probably have a home that they're either own or rent. We're going to assume for the purposes of conversation that you own the home and you can make modifications to it. And the first thing you're going to want to look for is, do you have enough power in the house to charge the car? Now, ideally, I think you would have, and I really think this is all you need, is a 50 amp circuit that you can hook up the included charger to. Yes, you can get the high powered wall charger, and yes, it will charge faster, but quite honestly, unless you're somebody that lives on 3 or 4 hours sleep every night, or somebody who's driving over 200 miles every day on a regular basis, you don't need a high powered wall charger. You just don't. That's the reality of it. And you'll be fine with the charger that comes with the car, the UMC, that mobile connector. But what you do want is a 50 amp circuit in your house. Now, my personal preference is I have a 50 amp circuit in my house, but I only charge at 30 amps. And that's just to give myself a little bit of overhead for heat and things like that, or any kind of goofiness that might happen. It probably costs very slightly more, maybe a penny per fill up, so to speak, to run it slightly lower, because I still have the same charging losses going through the system. But for the extra margin of safety, I think it's worthwhile. And that might just be me being superstitious, but that's how it goes. I should preface all this by saying I am not an electrician. If you followed my advice and you get zapped, we are going to consider that a Darwin Award for you. But, this is all just some guy talking on YouTube. So you're going to go start poking around in your box, putting your life at risk. You need to know what the hell you're doing. That's really, really important. So looking at your box, a lot of people count up the numbers on the circuits, the 15 amps, the 20 amps, and all that, and they add them all together, and they go, well, it's way over the number at the top of the box, which is probably either 100, 150, or 200 amps, and they say, I can't possibly add a charger. Listen, that has nothing to do with whether or not you have room in your box. The main question is, do you have room for the breaker? And for a 50 amp, you're generally going to need a 2-pole breaker. That means a breaker that takes up 2 slots. And you're going to be able to potentially combine some of the other breakers you have if your box allows it to make room for it. That will be detailed on the label in the box. It will tell you which of the breaker positions you can put in those skinny breakers that have the 2 poles on one breaker, the 2 little switches on one breaker. Most boxes will allow for that, generally at the bottom of the box, generally only for the 15 or 20 amp circuits. So you might be able to buy space that way, because you have to fundamentally have the real estate for the 50 amp breaker. once you've established that you have room for it, you need to make sure that it's balanced. Now, there's a whole bunch of equations that go into how that is calculated, but generally speaking, if you have a 100 amp box and you want to run your stove, and it's a 50 amp electric stove, and you want to charge your car, even if you're only charging at 30 amps, you don't want them on the same side of the box. You want them to be on opposite sides of the box. So you got to consider how you're going to use things in your house, how your box is currently set up, because usually there's not a lot of slack in those wires to extend them, and to move them from side to side requires wire. And if you don't have the extra wire there, you're not moving that breaker. And so you generally want to have the box kind of balanced. What the number at the top means, whether it's a 100 amp breaker, 150 amp breaker, or 200 amp breaker, is the total amount of draw you can have at any one time. So all the numbers on the breakers below will generally add up to be way in excess of what the capacity of the box is. But that's fine, because you're not running everything all at once. You just want to make sure that you're running things in a somewhat balanced manner. Now, if you have to upgrade the box, it's not a big deal. The way I did it at my old house is I went and found a box at a local hardware store chain that's not paying for sponsorship, so they're not getting any mention. And picked out a box that I knew I would be able to buy additional breakers for, because we were buying a box that was much bigger than what we currently had. We went from a 100 amp to a 200 amp box, so I knew I would be adding circuits to it. This was years before electric cars were anything in my future. It wasn't even a thought at the time. And I bought the box, made sure I could get the breakers I wanted, had all the breakers ready, and then paid an electrician to come in and swap them out. At that time, which I want to say was probably about 2001, 2002, to go from a 100 amp box to a 200 amp box outside the city limits of Pittsburgh, by a licensed electrician, inspected, permitted, the whole thing, and because the service to my house did not need to be upgraded to run the additional power, it was, I think, $1,200. It was all labor, and he did a beautiful job, and the box was very pretty, and was able to do what I needed to do. Now, if you're adding a 50 amp service at the same time as upgrading the box, you might as well have the guy hook it up, because you already have the electrician there. But we're going on the assumption that you have a box that will work for that. Important note, if you have a square D box, look for square D breakers. This is why I bought my own box when I did the last upgrade. Don't go putting GE breakers in a square D box and vice versa. Yes, they will fit. Yes, you will find a way to make them fit if they don't. But filing off ends of breakers and putting in different brands into the same box is just generally a bad idea. You want everything to be matchy-matchy, as my wife says. So that's how you're going to do your home charging. As far as running the wire itself, look up your local codes, look at your situation, determine what you need to do. If it's in a garage, you're probably going to need to put it in Conduit. And Conduit is cheap, it's not hard to work with, and it's really the right way to do it. That protects you from all sorts of potential fire issues and code violations and home inspection issues if the house, whenever you sell it. So generally speaking, you're going to need Conduit unless it's in a sealed wall. And in some places, I believe they even require it in Conduit in a sealed wall if it's that high in amperage and in an unfinished, semi-unfinished space like a garage. So you might want to check on that. The number one mistake that I see commonly being made by people who do their own installations on their 50 amp outlets is they don't tighten everything down enough. And it sits in the garage, and with the temperature swings from summer to winter, and then the inherent vibration in the plug itself, because as power goes through it, there's a resonance there, which is getting into electric theory that, again, not an electrician, I don't know. But getting into that electric theory, you'll find that there's a resonance or a vibration that happens when the current is passed through. It will work those loose. And when those lugs work loose, you have all sorts of potential problems, not the least of which being that you can overheat the circuit, probably not cause a fire, probably just cause the breaker to go off. You can really make your UMC very mad at you by not having reliable power that way, so you might get errors with your charger, but you want to make sure that all those lugs are really tight. There's certain torque specs, I don't remember what they are. You can look them up. You may be able to find them even on the outlet itself. If you're going to be taking your UMC with you a lot, in other words, plugging it in and out on a number of, like very frequently, you do want to buy a higher grade breaker. Typically, the cheap breakers you find at the big box stores are designed for stoves that, that plug is in and out maybe 10 times in its entire life every time you buy a new stove. Otherwise, it just sits there and isn't messed with. If you're going to use your car charger that way, hey, that's fine. Get the cheap breaker. But if you're going to need to take it with you for whatever reason, like maybe you're charging at home and at work, then you want to buy the more expensive breaker. And I think even, or the more expensive outlet. I think even at that, it's like $50. I mean, go ahead and buy it. Well, I'm at work now, so this will be the end of this particular podcast. I do have some other things about the troubleshooting I think is worth mentioning, and we'll get to that next time, maybe on the drive home. So we will consider this part one, part uno, and please subscribe. I want to keep this channel going. I think there's some good information we can share, good conversations we can have. I welcome your comments, I welcome your questions, and I'll see you for part two, maybe on the drive home. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. I sounded like Bill Clinton when I said that. Please subscribe. It's very important that you subscribe. Yes, please subscribe. All right, thanks everybody. See you later.